country. Moments that force people to stop scrolling. Moments where a name becomes more than a headline. Elijah McClain. On the night of August 24th, 2019, Elijah was simply walking home from a convenience store in Aurora, Colorado. He wasn't running, he wasn't arguing, he wasn't committing a crime, he was walking. He was 23 years old, a massage therapist, a musician, a quiet, gentle soul by all accounts. Friends described him as kind, sensitive, almost shy, the kind of person who would apologize even when he didn't need to. Elijah was known for playing violin at animal shelters to calm rescue dogs. He believed music could heal. He believed people deserved softness. That night, he was wearing a ski mask. It wasn't unusual. He had anemia and would get cold easily. The mask helped keep him warm, but someone called 911 and reported a suspicious person walking down the street. Suspicious. The caller even told dispatch that Elijah wasn't threatening anyone. He wasn't armed. He wasn't bothering anyone. He just looked sketchy. Within minutes, Aurora police officers confronted Elijah. Body cam footage would later show confusion from the very start. Elijah appeared startled. He repeatedly said he was an introvert, that he was just walking home, that he hadn't done anything wrong. "I'm an introvert. Please respect the boundaries that I'm speaking." Those were his words. Officers attempted to detain him. A struggle followed. Elijah was placed in a carotid hold, a neck restraint designed to restrict blood flow to the brain. He lost consciousness. Paramedics were called. Instead of evaluating him calmly, they injected him with ketamine, a powerful sedative, in a dosage based on an estimated weight that turned out to be inaccurate. Elijah went into cardiac arrest on the way to the hospital. He was declared brain dead days later. He died on August 30th, 2019. At first, officials defended the officer's actions. The department said the force used was within policy. The case seemed headed toward quiet closure. But then the body cam footage was released, and the world saw something different. They saw a young black man apologizing while being restrained. They heard him say he couldn't breathe. They heard him cry. They watched him fade. And suddenly, Elijah McClain was no longer just a local story. He became a symbol, not of anger, but of fragility, of how quickly a life can shift from normal to fatal, of how suspicion, especially when directed at black bodies, can escalate into something irreversible. This isn't about outrage yet. It's about Elijah. Because before the protests, before the lawsuits, before the trials, he was just a young man walking home. For months after Elijah McClain's death, the case moved quietly. No charges, no arrests, no disciplinary action. The district attorney declined to prosecute in 2019, stating there was insufficient evidence to prove the officers committed a crime. The department said the carotid hold was within policy. The paramedics' ketamine injection was described as medically justified. And that could have been the end of it. But then came 2020. The death of George Floyd ignited protests across the country. Cities erupted with anger and grief. Names long buried resurfaced. Elijah McClain's name came back into the light. Protesters filled the streets of Aurora. Thousands gathered for violin vigils in his honor. Musicians playing in parks, outside city buildings, across the country. They chose violins because Elijah loved to play for animals at shelters. It became a symbol of who he was. Gentle, artistic, soft-spoken. But the protests were not quiet. Demonstrators demanded accountability. They demanded an independent review. They demanded that the state look at the case again. Under growing national pressure, Colorado Governor Jared Polis ordered an independent investigation in June 2020. That changed everything. A grand jury was convened. Evidence was re-examined. Body cam footage was reanalyzed. Policies were scrutinized. In September 2021, nearly 2 years after Elijah's death, a grand jury indicted 3 Aurora police officers and 2 paramedics. The charges were serious. The officers faced counts including manslaughter and criminally negligent homicide. The paramedics were charged for their role in administering the ketamine injection. For the first time, the system acknowledged that something may have gone wrong. The trials began in 2023. The outcomes were complicated. One officer was acquitted, another was convicted of criminally negligent homicide and third-degree assault. The paramedics' cases resulted in mixed verdicts, one conviction, one acquittal. No murder convictions, no sweeping accountability. But there was something the family had fought for from the beginning. Recognition that Elijah's death was not simply a tragic accident, it was preventable. It was a chain reaction, a suspicious call, an aggressive stop, a neck restraint, a sedative, a so-called miscalculated dose, each step building on the last, and at the center of it all, a young man walking home. The public outcry forced a second look. It forced indictments. It forced policy conversations across the state. The state later restricted the use of ketamine in law enforcement encounters. But for Elijah's family, the question remains, is partial accountability enough? Across the United States, Black men and women have repeatedly found themselves in situations where a routine encounter, a traffic stop, a wellness check, a call for help, suddenly turns into something life-threatening. Sometimes it happens during a misunderstanding. Sometimes it begins with suspicion. And sometimes, like in Elijah's case, the escalation happens so quickly that there is almost no moment for the situation to slow down. That is what made this case resonate so deeply. A young man walking home. No weapon. No crime. Just a call about someone who looked suspicious. And within minutes, that call set off a chain of decisions that Elijah McClain would never recover from. In the years following his death, the state of Colorado implemented new restrictions on the use of ketamine during police encounters. Medical protocols were reviewed. Law enforcement training policies were questioned. But policy changes often come after tragedy, after a life has already been lost. And for many families across the country, those changes arrive too late. Because when a name becomes a headline, the person behind that name is already gone. And I want to pause here for a moment and say something directly. Telling these stories takes a toll. Every time I sit down to research another case, another name, another life cut short, it weighs on me. Black body after black body, another mother, another son, another family trying to understand how something so ordinary could end so violently. Sometimes while writing these stories, I have to stop. The weight of it catches up to me. Tears swell up in my eyes because these are not just headlines to me. These are human beings, my people. And in many ways, I feel connected to them. Connected to the fear their families must feel. Connected to the frustration of knowing how often these stories repeat themselves. That connection is part of why Wide Eyes Media exists. Not to sensationalize tragedy, but to make sure these stories are seen clearly. Because when a story fades too quickly, the lessons disappear with it. And when that happens, the cycle continues. Elijah McClain's story forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about perception, about escalation, and about how quickly suspicion can become fatal when the person being viewed through that lens is Black. It forces us to ask whether systems designed to protect the public apply to Black folks. I think it's a valid question. In the end, Elijah McClain's story should never have been a national case. It should have been simple. A young man walks home from the store. He makes it back safely. Yet beyond the headlines, beyond the courtrooms, beyond the protests, there is something that should not be forgotten. Elijah McClain was not defined by the night he died. He was a gentle soul who played violin for animals, a quiet young man who described himself as an introvert, a person who believed in kindness in a world that too often forgets it. And perhaps the most important thing we can do now is remember that part of him. Because justice, accountability, and reform matter, but remembrance matters too. So tonight, wherever you are watching this from, take a moment to remember the name. Elijah McClain.